So welcome back, assuming you are back, to the final session of today's housing conference. We have David Rudlin with us, who's also a past chair of the AOU and has written quite a number of articles in connection with this subject. So David, I'll hand over to you.
Thank you, Andrew. Hopefully Kaylin's going to share my slides because I've been having computer issues this afternoon and don't have access to it and probably can't remember what it says, but I'm sure it will be fine. So I wanted to, I mean, it's been a fantastic day. I've sat here really being inspired by many of the presentations and many of them have dealt with that big issue that we always come to in these situations, which is the gap between what is required to deal with the climate emergency and the action that's being taken at the moment. To be fair, not everyone has managed to bridge that gap, but some people have at least shown action. I was just before lockdown out with a director of one of the big architecture practices who'd just spoken incredibly eloquently about the climate emergency and how we need to have a zero carbon future. And I said to him, so will your practice therefore not take on any more work which is not zero carbon? And his response was, God forbid, no, we out of business in weeks. And of course, that's the problem. On the one hand, we understand the action taken, but as professionals who rely upon clients and rely upon the market to operate, it's quite difficult. So, I mean, we welcomed a few years ago the Arkitekt declaration, which tried to get architects to think about this. And it seemed to us that we ought to have a Urbanist declare version of it. So this is something that was drawn up a year or so ago. We were going to have an event on it, but was stymied by lockdown. And it's this event today seemed like a good opportunity to dig it out again and dust it off and to get a little bit of discussion going on it as well. So can we go to the next slide, Kaylin? If that will go over. So we're urbanists, and of course, we are therefore major players in this whole debate because cities are at the heart of the climate crisis. If we go to the next slide. And I've written in the past, as Andrew said, this was a book produced with Nicholas Falk 20 years ago now, that cities are also the solution to the climate crisis. And in this book, there's a line which says something like, everything except for food growing can be done more greenly within cities. And that's always been my view, and I think it's always been the Academy's view. The Academy has always felt that it's on the side of the angels when it comes to climate emergency, because good urbanism is by definition sustainable. So let's go to the next slide, because it begs a question about this whole debate. Give me the next slide. Yeah, this is UN figures. So we often hear the figure quoted that 55% of the world's population live in cities, but actually less often the fact that 78% of the world's energy is produced by those 55% and that 60% of greenhouse emissions. So in other words, people in cities are producing more environmental damage than those living outside cities. And that seems to contradict, on the face of it, the view that we all have that urbanism is basically good for the environment. I mean, I think there are reasons for that. I mean, one of the main reasons is that people move to cities, particularly in places like India, to improve their quality of life, and that comes with more consumption. So there are reasons for it, but nevertheless, we shouldn't be complacent and think that urbanism is by definition good for the environment. So let's go to the next slide. So we should stop assuming that cities are intrinsically sustainable. 15-minute city diagram in the background. Next slide. So when I have control of these things, I can flick through them really quickly. But I think there's lots of discussion about what the sustainable city looks like, and I think we'll all have different reactions to pictures on this page, but they're all touted as images of the sustainable city. Some of them aren't particularly urban, and for both reasons of them being skyscrapers and being very low density. I think what happens in this debate is that the sustainable city is whatever you think the city should be. So if you're the Town and Country Planning Association, the sustainable city is the garden city. If you're us urbanists, then the sustainable city is the dense city. I think there is a precondition come to this in terms of the way we look at these things. Next slide, Kaylin. So it seems to me, writing this, there are lots of things that actually we don't know. And of course, as consultants, we know everything, and we are very rarely able to admit ignorance. But I won't go through all of these because there's too much there to the time we've got available. But you know, we've had the debate today about when is it right to knock something down and when is it right to keep it. If it's low density, low rise, energy efficient buildings, is it more efficient to knock it down and build something super efficient and much denser? Or is it something we should always keep? I don't think these things are actually things that we fully understand what the equations are when we're doing this. The debate that we've had often recently in Urban is about orientation. There are people who support passive housing that says orientation must always be due south. And yet, as you know, from an urban design perspective, that really does mess up your layout. And so there's a question about, you know, how much is orientation important? So the balance between thermal efficiency and cooling, which is going to become a major issue as temperature starts to rise. So it seems to me there's a need for research. And actually, I was talking to Nicholas Falk earlier about these discussions and about the role the Academy should be playing in thinking about research into these areas and to research into the pattern of settlements and the connected city and links to railway stations and where we should build and so on. And it thinks the Academy shouldn't assume these are settled arguments, and I think we should have a very strong role in focusing that debate. So let's go to the next slide, Kaylin. We thought about the declaration and started off modeling it on the Arkitekt's declaration, and then realized that we had two different things here. We had what the city, the sustainable city, the zero carbon city of the future looks like, and then what the Academy should do about it. So we ended up splitting the declaration into two parts. And the first part is the bit which relates to the city itself. So let's have the next slide. So Urbanists declare that we should be planning, managing and celebrating towns and cities that, ... next slide, so are capable of achieving zero carbon living. The word capable is actually quite important there. Again, that's going back to my Arkitekt at the beginning. It may not be that everything we can do can be immediately zero carbon, but it should all be capable of zero carbon in the future. That we look at the energy use and carbon emissions associated with construction, thing that we've been talking about all day today, and that we take in account the fact that that is now often the major carbon issue with regard to construction rather than energy in use. We look at local renewable energy production, that we target 70% of trips by cycling, walking and public transport, which is pretty much what Copenhagen does. We're miles off that in the UK at the moment. That we look to a circular economy in terms of maximising and reusing waste, so that we don't send materials to landfill. Those are the first five. Let's go to the next slide, Kaylin. That we think about livability and comfort. We think about microclimate. We think about overheating. That we're resilient and adaptive to flooding in terms of where we build and how we build. That we take account of green infrastructure and biodiversity. That we look at local air pollution and we ensure that the areas that we create meet World Health Association targets in terms of air pollution. And finally, that we do all this with the buy-in and the consent of the local community. And so the first part of the declaration is that those 10 points which set out what we think the sustainable city of the future is, the city that we urbanists should be seeking to create. The second 10, which if we go to the next slide, then to this end, urbanists, that's us, declare, ... next slide. That first of all, we recognise the central role that urban areas have to play in addressing the climate emergency, both in the way that they're designed and managed. And therefore, you know, as I said at the beginning, we recognise the importance of the subject that we deal with, and that we use our networks to raise awareness of this issue, which I don't think we do as much as we could do. This event is a very good start in that respect, in terms of the impact that cities can have. That we recognise, as I said, that we don't know enough about how cities can be more effectively, and we commit ourselves to research and best practice in this area. That we share the outputs of that research and best practice, and that we take account, and this is something that we try and do with our awards, we take account of the impacts of a place on the climate emergency when giving awards and assessing best practice. It's really hard. I know that our assessment panels are always asking that question, but are never getting particularly satisfactory answers when we're assessing places. And so let's go to the last 5. This is again for the Academy, that will encourage all places we work with to monitor their sustainability performance, and in terms of a whole range of areas, and that is reported as part of the awards process or the good practice process that we do, that we engage with other built environment professionals, particularly architects, but also planning and highway engineers, in terms of promoting this agenda. And that this is always the crux in terms of the Academy, who just decided to have their next Congress probably in Belfast, that we recognise the value of international networks, but we will avoid air travel. I've been on aeroplanes entirely filled with members of the Academy of Urbanism heading off to places like Stockholm or Copenhagen for events, and I think we should just stop doing that, to be honest. I think we should find other ways of learning from places without having to travel by air. We'll minimise the impacts of the day-to-day operation of the Academy, and we'll encourage, which is what I'm doing at the moment, Urbanists to sign up to this charter. So that's me and my contribution. I think it's worth digging this out again. It's worth having a discussion about whether we're prepared to do this, and it's also worth having a discussion about what it means for what we do if we do sign up to this. So thank you very much, Andrew.
Thank you, David. We have Annalisa, who I believe is going to give her presentation as well. Is that an appropriate term? And in which case, I'll just hand over to you, Anna.
Okay, great. Thank you. Can you hear me okay? So I wear several hats. I'm an architect. I sit on the steering group of Architects Declare, and I'm also a member of the Architects Climate Action Network. So today I'm going to speak with my ACAN hat on, and I'm going to speak about Households Declare, which is a campaign offering one attempt at a solution to the questions of today's conference. That is, how do we turn abstract agreements into practice? And it'll be a bit of an experiment, but I thought I could run through the campaign website as the best way of sharing this with you. So I'm just going to share my screen. The name Households Declare is important, as it gives agency not just to homeowners, but to all households, regardless of type or tenure. So theoretically, every single person in the UK can declare. And as with many of ACAN's strategies, it recognises the need for a bottom-up as well as a top-down approach to enact change. So firstly, a little bit about ACAN. ACAN is a voluntary network of individuals from within architecture and its related built environment professions. Our mission is to mobilise a new movement of professional activists by building an open, supportive and inclusive organisation. So we welcome your experience, but we ask you to leave your business title at the door. Our aims are clearly set out as rapid decarbonisation, ecological regeneration and cultural transformation. And these are aims that run through all of our campaigns and working groups. So just go to our working groups. I've been a part of the Existing Buildings Working Group, and this is where the Households Declare campaigns germinated. So the responsibility to reduce the emissions contributed by existing buildings cannot be underestimated, and this sets the mandate for the Existing Buildings Group to increase awareness and to develop campaigns that will bring about change in relevant policy and practice. So some campaigns that we've been involved in, we've had a conservation planning reform, which is a research project with the end goal of a planning toolkit. And this aims to balance heritage value with climate impact and builds on the work of Letty's Emergency Retrofit Guide, which is being launched tomorrow. The Existing Buildings Group has supported petitions for the reduction of VAT on retrofits. We host socials within our group with the aim to build connections and awareness amongst our professional community. And we held an online stocktake event, bringing together speakers from different backgrounds to understand the current UK retrofit picture. So we believe in hearing from a range of perspectives, from the community to understand their needs and how they use their domestic spaces, to the supply chain and the contractors responsible for its delivery. But what we realize is that we're spending way too much time working out the details before we have all the necessary buy-in for the mass decarbonisation of our homes, and that we as a room of architects do not have the ability nor the responsibility to achieve this alone. So we think systemic change is required for us to meet the challenges of climate and ecological breakdown. And for this, we need societal, economic, and political interests to align. We need to grow momentum in public opinion and to build political pressure. Looking at hundreds of campaigns over the last century, Erica Chenoweth found that non-violence is the most successful approach, and it takes just 3.5% of the population actively participating in protests to achieve a campaign's goal. So whilst activism can take many forms, marching on the streets, for example, or specifying low carbon materials in our projects, what we realize is that we need a public-facing awareness campaign so that the public can make informed decisions, and with the aim of increasing the uptake of emerging domestic retrofit initiatives. So this essentially is the bottom up. And at the same time, we need regulation to limit emissions of not just new, but existing buildings, and policies that remove our reliance on fossil fuels. So this is the top down. We know the Green Deal promised a large-scale rollout of building efficiency improvements, and they didn't happen. Lots of initiatives are happening, but do people know about them? If action is needed soon, then these initiatives need to be adopted nationwide. So how do we involve the nation? Well, opinion may be polarized on the different actions of Insulate Britain, but what their tactics have achieved is front page headlines. And now it seems everybody is talking about heat pumps and retrofits. So short of producing an educational primetime TV series, although watch this space, we considered that our leverage as a professional activist group and as a network is our design and communication skills and our ability to offer leadership. So let's talk about Households Declare. We launched Households Declare to highlight the extent of the problem of emissions from homes in the UK and to put pressure on our elected representatives to do something about it. We intend to educate and empower everyone in the country to make changes to improve the comfort, health, and performance of their homes, and to verbalise the necessary demands for this to happen. So if we look at the context, the campaign in its practical sense takes the form of a website on which there are plenty of useful resources, infographics illustrating the context, and eventually a declaration page. So some quick facts, I know people have spoken about these today, but 80% of UK homes in use today, 80% of homes that will be in use by 2050 have already been built. And even homes being built today are not up to the standards to meet zero carbon targets. Homes are important because we spend 90% of our time indoors. And we think that retrofit is a key to tackling climate breakdown. So what is retrofit? Retrofit is the introduction of new materials, products, and technologies into an existing building. And whilst retrofit, well, the government has announced that it's going to support low carbon heating systems, but these would be most effective if a whole house approach is taken, focusing first on the heat efficiency of the fabric. So that's the windows, walls, roof, and floor, and then also the ventilation. So even before we get into climate breakdown, as a nation, we are dealing with many human and economic issues to which we think that retrofit could be beneficial. Human health for starters, respiratory disease caused by damp and mold and cold and poorly ventilated homes is adding strain to the NHS. Bad indoor air quality and material finishes, volatile organic compounds, again, they're impacting health and productivity, especially now when we're working more from home. Then we have fuel poverty, which has been exacerbated by recent gas price rises and a reliance on fossil fuels. And post-COVID, a jobs crisis with furlough coming to an end, for which a mass retrofit programme, according to the New Economics Foundation, could offer 500,000 new jobs. So when we add on an estimated 21% reduction in annual emissions that a retrofit revolution would give us, it seems a bit of a no-brainer. But there are some things that we're kind of still grappling with in the existing buildings group. So firstly, the cost of retrofit, and how is this fair and accessibly made available to those who are unable to pay. There's the embodied carbon associated with retrofit. So for example, many commonly used insulation materials such as extruded polystyrene have a high embodied carbon. And we need to balance this with savings to heat energy that the installation would allow. So the need for more natural materials and low carbon retrofit is key. If we stick with our insulation example, life cycle emissions can be reduced by choosing salvaged or locally produced material. And some insulating materials like straw bale or hempcrete sequester carbon, and they would have negative emissions. But currently there are supply chain issues and perhaps a skills shortage to deliver this at scale. So what's our position? I mean, in order for the UK to meet our climate change Act targets and the commitments made under the Paris Agreement, emissions from heating and powering homes must be reduced by 78% in less than 15 years, and then to zero by 2050. We need to begin retrofitting now in order to meet these targets. And we think that the industry, innovation, and skills needed to deliver large-scale, low-carbon solutions will develop in response if demand and governance necessitates it. So technologies will emerge in tandem. Hydrogen, for example, may prove appropriate in some applications, although in general, it is a less efficient use of energy than powering heat pumps directly. And we need to make sure our focus is on a people-centered approach. That's in reducing our energy demand first. So our demands. Declaring a climate emergency via this platform allows us to use a collective voice to send a strong message to the government, as the list of declared signatures will be sent together with a list of our demands to Alex Sharma, the appointed UK president for COP26. So we've structured our letter like this. Firstly, we are reiterating a sense of urgency, and we are offering a problem by telling them what they know. And then we give actions and a solution.
Hello?
Oh, I don't know why I can't get out of this. There we go.
Oh no, if I did, it was a mistake. Don't worry, and I've got.
So if you do want to declare, you can do so by adding your name to the list of signatories. And as you can see, we have had so far 1,232 signatures. So the aim for the future of households declare is, well, following on from COP, it's a number of declarations to keep on growing. And this was just our first action. This is a long-term campaign and it's only just gathering momentum. The next phase of the declaration will be a series of commitments to take us beyond the heat and building strategy. For householders, there will be a commitment to engage in behavioural changes and in community actions. Our ambition is to create localised hubs for all players in the process, from designers to builders and local authorities, and to create a support community, a platform for knowledge and resource sharing. Ideally, we would like to build on the good work that we've seen Carbon Co-op presenting to develop community-powered retrofit schemes. So both ACAN and Arkitekt Declare will have a strong presence at COP26, and we'll continue to ramp up our political pressure. Probably stop sharing.
Thank you very much, Anna. I'm trying to get all the various bits of my computer working again as well now. Really interesting stuff, and I think between what David said and what Anna said, we'll just open up to a question and answer or comments or feelings that anybody else has within the audience as to what might be the next course of action for the Academy and also in support of what Anna's been talking about. So does anybody have any instant need to pass on their comments on any of this? David Lum, can you come in? Thanks.
Hi, yes. Can you see me all right?
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's all good. The linkage to the Architect's declaration is an interesting thing for me, being a retired architect but a practicing independent urbanist. But that's just a personal situation. My comment is, and my question is, that we do need this declaration because as urbanists we need to be starting to actually address the climate crisis, not talk about it, because what's happening at the moment is there's a lot of talk, a lot of promise, a lot of projection, a lot of policy, but not a lot of action. And we're in a unique position as urbanists, some more than others, to actually get down dirty with the people, i.e., dare I use the word citizens? I know I'm accused of being a lefty when I refer to citizens, but my experience is bottom-up action in the urban context. And the crisis is now taking first place in everything we do as a community interest company. But I think the nod in the 10th list, in the list of 10 things we should be doing, I think that's how David described it, rather than the 10 more assertive declarations, does mention making provision for community buy-in, ownership and control at neighbourhood and city level to achieve all of the above, which is an all-encompassing thing. But I think we need to be a little bit more committed to working with people in their communities, in their neighbourhoods, with their families and their children. The thing that really keeps me awake at night about climate crisis is the lack of communication with children as to what we're doing with their future. It needs to be moved up the priority list.
Thank you. David, do you have any further views, having
Yeah, I mean, certainly my experience is that the children are communicating with us rather than vice versa, which I think is
good point.
well and good. And they're the ones telling us in no uncertain futures that we're messing up their future and that we should be acting. I think it's interesting to think about what a declare is, what one of these things is. It is a undertaking given by members of an organization to do something differently to what they did before, I think. And I think the Arkitekt one has been particularly useful when it comes to certain unnamed individuals who've taken on airport jobs, for example, and then have to ask themselves whether they can really be signatories of this and do that. I think it does make you think in terms of your day-to-day work as an urbanist about whether this site is really appropriate to be doing when you're signed up to this declaration. So I think that's the purpose of it. I think, obviously we need to do all sorts of things, and, changing government policy and all that stuff is also crucial. But this particular document, I think, is aimed at internally at ourselves and actually getting us to take this subject seriously. So I'd like to see a situation where, if you're a member of the Academy, you sign up to this and then you take it seriously in terms of what you do both in your daily life, but also in your professional life.
Thank you. Nicholas, you've your hands up for a while.
Thanks. I'm all in favour of the Academy both campaigning and transcending professional and sectoral differences, and therefore, in my view, it has a unique role to play. But it can only be taken seriously if it builds on what it knows, specially or uniquely, which is the knowledge of what makes places successful. So that's the first point. Secondly, in order to be effective, I think we have to synthesize our many concerns into much fewer than 10 points. I know there were 10 commandments, but most of us can't remember more than 5 or 7 things. And I loved the 3 principles that we just heard from the architects. So can we not seek to distill the 10 down to 3 or 5 points? I like the idea that we're both recognizing what makes a good place, and we're also saying what urbanists should do about it. So in my view, we shouldn't just say, oh, it was nice to hear David give the list, but rather create, if you like, a small working group, to actually take that to the point where we have something that's truly memorable. The third thing is that I love the notion that websites can be really effective and interactive. I've been very impressed by the a website for changing reforming the business rate and the council tax, and I believe with the right little bit of investment, we can really have much more of an impact than our numbers might suggest.
Thank you. In terms of reducing the 10 points, I think there's been quite a bit of work already on this, David.
I'm happy to do that. I think that making it as easy to use as possible is probably no bad thing. I think the Arkitekt's one was 10, which is why we decided to have a similar one. I mean, I'm interested in asking Anna, really, Annalisa, about the impact this has had on the architect profession, because I know the Architects Declare thing was the first of these, and how that's really worked, and how whether it's been effective or whether it's been as effective as the people who wrote it would have liked it to have been.
I was just going to start by just clarifying the difference between Architects Declare and ACAN, because I think, David, the basis that you're referring to is the Architects Declaration that came out in 2019. And very similar, I think that's a point of perhaps it's 10 points, which are commitments that all businesses, kind of practices who are operating would sign up to, and then they would kind of, as a unity and a single voice, kind of work towards these commitments. Architects Climate Action Network, on the other hand, what I've just kind of presented you is a group about individuals, so kind of separate from their business incentives or the practices that they work for, doing kind of thematically kind of organized working groups around different issues in climate and the built environment. So I think the kind of everybody is very welcome to join ACAN, regardless of background. And that's where they have 3 points about, you know, decarbonisation, ecological regeneration, and cultural transformation. But to come to Architects Declare, I think the things that have been very good for it is the leadership that's been offered. I mean, it was kind of the size of organizations that got together. They were Sterling Prize winning organizations that made the initial declaration, and they offer really good leadership to other kind of single practitioners and other people to follow these commitments. And I think there is an understanding that we need to be very visionary and ambitious and quite radical within this group, because that is, you know, pushing the boundaries of what we're achieving within architecture and the built environment, and what kind of projects we should be foregoing to, you know, really get systemic change. You know, that's kind of what it's pushing for. And there is an understanding that we don't have all the answers, but we are doing what we can to provide leadership to everybody that does sign up. And the more people that do sign up, the more unified voices and the more kind of powerful you can be in terms of your leverage and the influence you can have on changing the kind of the government structures that are needed. That I think the feeling is that, you know, the industry is doing so much, and we're having conferences like this, and we are developing our skills to be able to deliver a low carbon future. But it's a push and pull, because we also need legislations and taxations and regulations to deliver that from the top down. So it's trying to give a structure that can have a higher leverage and give guidance to the rest of the architecture community to follow.
Thank you.
And do you get a sense that it's been effective? Both, I mean, I wasn't trying to conflate the two, but certainly, you know, both of the things that you've been working on are about changing the way our architects think about the climate emergency. Mm-hmm. Do you get a sense that the profession has changed its attitudes as a result of this, or I think greenwash sort of, everyone sort of says they're sustainable, but actually when you look at the jobs they take, then you maybe question how deep that goes.
Yeah, I mean, it's really difficult, isn't it? Because everyone has kind of employees' salaries to pay, and it's just, I think that the kind of the thinking space is about 4 years ahead of like the project work, and that's the nature of having slower moving projects and large projects, and even more with kind of urban scale projects. I think it has been really beneficial, and I think it's almost an experience level and energy and generational thing as well. ACAN has attracted so much energy from originally or initially kind of people who are quite new into their careers, and they're infiltrating much more into kind of the curriculums and how we are informing the next generation of architects. And it's kind of from this bottom up that we've been putting pressure onto business owners and to bosses within these companies. So that's kind of a bubbling underneath kind of momentum that's growing, and I think that's very strong. The decision-making side comes perhaps more from Architects Declare and the affiliation and contact with directors of companies and how their business operates and their business plans. And I think that's where Architects Declare is giving more guidance and having these difficult conversations about, you know, what kind of projects we're taking on, and, you know, do we make commitments, you know, the kind of aforementioned issues around airports. We've been running surveys to kind of gain opinion from the industry so that we can kind of confidently say this is kind of what the industry believes, and this is kind of who we're representing. So around difficult issues, we're doing what we can to understand the position of the industry and where we need to be, and to kind of enter into those difficult conversations to try and make sure that we're all on the same page.
Thank you. Well, we're getting into the real nuts and bolts of the discussion, but strangely enough and unfortunately, we also have a time limit that we've got to try and keep to. So if I think what the next stage for the potential AOU or Urbanists Declare is, it'd be useful to take some of the discussion that's been had this afternoon, and we'll take that plus the draft to the board at the next meeting. David, have you feel so inclined? And we can I think we've got the point of you know, keeping it shall we say simple, straightforward, and trying to get the message in a manner that perhaps allows us all to join together with some pressure, rather than perhaps some might have seen it as being slightly self-righteous if you can tick all the boxes. So I don't think it was ever intended to be. So I think maybe we'll just revisit again if we may. I think we've reached the end of what has been rather a long day in some ways, but nevertheless a very enjoyable and series of talks that has allowed us all, hopefully, and certainly it's allowed me to understand the complexities somewhat better than I did when I came in at the beginning. But if I can go through a long list, if you'll bear with me, a long list of our speakers today, who need to be thanked and certainly deserve to be thanked. We had two excellent chairs in Professor Sadie Morgan and Chris Brown, who dealt with the first and the third sessions. We had Karen Cuff, MEP, Will Hurst, Professor Dr. Holger Walborn, Helen Grimshaw, Thomas Krabitz, if I've got that name right, Nick Walker, Professor Ken Gibb, John Coleman, Dr. Eleanor Warwick, Wesley Rowan, Josh Grantham, Jonathan Wilson, Jacqueline Holman, and Annalisa McSweeney. So to all of you as well, very much the AOU is in your gratitude. We have our team, which a lot of the work for this has been done by Stephen Gallagher, Kaylin Murphy, Linda Gladstone, Roshni Thacker, David Rudlin, and for those who are not within the immediate team, there was Professor Brian Evans, Lorraine Landols, and numerous other advisors, as well as quite a number of our own directors who have recommended who we should contact for potential speakers and building on the subjects. So it's a lot of thanks to a lot of you to allow us to have this particular event. And maybe you can all come to COP26, and if it's possible to get there by everything that's going to be on strike at the time. So we'll find out how that all goes. Thank you all very much indeed. End of our session, and we hope to see you all again. Thanking you.